Antoine.
Ross.
Good to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Good to meet you in person. Welcome back to Lyon.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, how was the trip?
Great. It's nice to be here. Not super sunny though today, but
not so sunny. You're right.
But it's a wonderful city. I love it.
Yeah, and you've arrived on it's a Machon week.
Is it?
Machon week. Did you ever do a Machon? No. So next time.
Never tried that. Next time.
We have to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. See, you're the local.
Yeah. We'll do that after an episode rather than before.
Okay. Agreed.
But anyway, I think we should probably start. If you could tell us about who Antoine Gliksohn is.
In short.
In short.
Okay.
Well, we have time. Relax.
So, as you said, we've got my first name and my last name, Antoine Gliksohn. I'm a person with albinism. I'm French. I was born in France and I grew up in France. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings with albinism. And I'm currently the Executive Director of the Global Albinism Alliance.
So you're the only one of your family with albinism?
No, all 3 of us.
All 3 of you have albinism? Yeah. Okay.
So it's quite specific. It's not that rare in our community. If you spend some time in this albinism community, you will discover that there are many sibships where there are several siblings with albinism. But still, compared to a family where there would be only one child with albinism in a group of children without albinism, it's a completely different experience.
Right. And so for those that don't know, albinism is a genetic condition that requires both parents to be carriers of the albinism gene.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So, which means that in most cases, parents have no idea that they're carrying this gene. There's no cases of people with albinism in the family, and out of the sudden it appears. So it's always a big surprise.
Yeah. Well, it's it's wonderful to have you here today for this episode. And on a very personal note, I have a young daughter that has albinism.
Okay.
So, of course, we didn't find out as parents that we were carriers until Arabella was born.
So you have that experience of...
So we have that experience, yeah. And it's going to be interesting. What I'd like to do is to talk about your life as a person with albinism and learn what I can from you as a father of a daughter with albinism.
Sure.
But also to dive into the Global Albinism Alliance, which you're the Executive Director of.
Sure, a pleasure.
So first of all, what was it
exciting.
like? What was it like growing up in France, and where did you grow up in France? And what was it like growing up with albinism here?
So, as I said before, I've got a brother and a sister. They were born before me. My sister was born in 1979, and I was born in 1983. So in the early 80s in France, and so my experience is probably has some commonalities with the experience of other people with albinism who grew up in France at that time, but also has its own specificities. And interestingly, I might be going a bit off-road here, but in my position of Executive Director of the Global Albinism Alliance, I keep going back and forth between my personal experience and what I'm trying to learn of the experience of people with albinism living around the world. And you might have discovered already, or you will discover, that there are huge differences. Albinism is one element in my life, but there are so many other things that have an impact on my life that have nothing to do with albinism. So what was it like to grow up with albinism in France at that time? You know, I have the feeling that over time I tend to forget a lot of things, particularly the bad things. So in short, I would say it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't that tough. But I'm sure I went through some difficulties that I've just forgotten. And it's a good thing in a way. But also being surrounded by 2 siblings, older siblings with albinism, made it probably much easier for me. It made it much easier for my parents. When I was born, I'm sure they were happy to see that, The third one also has albinism. It's going to make our life much easier.
And just to clarify, both your parents, they don't have albinism?
No, they don't.
Okay.
No, they don't. They're not related in any way. Just happened that they were both carriers.
Right.
So it probably took me some time before I realized that I was a bit different, that I had albinism, and it took me some time to even understand what that meant to have albinism. At school, I would every year I would be with a new teacher who already knew what albinism was, because that teacher would have seen my brother and my sister before.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have to explain much, and so no big difficulties. Of course, I was sitting at the front row, and I had to carry my magnifying glass all the time, and I would certainly face both visual difficulties, but also I would probably deal with some mild stigmatization, maybe, because children are never super nice to each other, but it hasn't left any sort of trauma or any
Lasting
specific
scars.
Yeah.
No. So for those that don't know, could you explain to us what albinism is in terms of the eyesight, the skin, the melanin?
And I'm glad you specified in terms of eyesight, melanin and skin, because there are so many different definitions of albinism. So today, in short, I would say that albinism is characterized by a lack of pigmentation in the skin, in the hair, and in the eyes. What does that mean? That means that, well, first and foremost, it's visible. The skin is light, very light. The hair as well. So people with albinism would have blonde hair or even white hair. I'm among those who probably have darker hair. So that's for what you see. Of course, the lack of pigment in the skin does not only affect the color of the skin, it also affects the ability of the skin to protect itself against the sun radiation. So in short, in the sun, our skin burns very quickly. Then you mentioned the vision. It appears that the lack of pigment in the eyes has an impact on the way the eyes develop. In other words, if you're lacking pigment in the eye, you're visually impaired. And this is not something you can fix, because it's just the way your eyes developed. They're healthy. There's nothing unhealthy in your eyes, but they don't function as well as the eyes of people without albinism. So we are visually impaired, which means that we have a low visual acuity, and this has impacts everywhere, in every at every step in our life, in every setting, at school, at work, for social life. There are other components in the vision that I could also explain, but first and foremost, it's the visual acuity that's very low. But there's a huge diversity in this community. Some people with albinism are extremely visually impaired. They need a guide dog, they need a cane to walk around. Others don't face that big of difficulties to a point where you don't actually feel that impairment at first glance. It takes time to realize that the person is actually visually impaired. There are friends of my family who took decades to understand that we were visually impaired. They knew we had albinism. They of course knew that it had a skin component, but the visual component, they had completely missed it. Even though my vision, the one of my brother and my sister, is not good. We could not drive, and at school it brought a lot of challenges. But it's hard for a normally sighted person to understand what it is to be visually impaired. So that's the visual component of albinism.
Yeah, and as a parent, I mean, from our experience, very interesting from a technological perspective, but to understand at a very early age that, what the prescription is, because of course a young child can't tell you whether they see something better or worse. So there appears to be a sort of trust element. I know with our daughter, she doesn't like wearing her glasses, and it's been very hard to sort of know if it's because the prescription's wrong, are they just frustrating her because, you know, they're a nuisance? She certainly doesn't give us the impression that she sees better with them. We're constantly looking for glasses. But as she matures and as her language develops, you know, we are able to sort of say, can you see better without them? Can you not see better with them? You know, and I think sometimes, you know, as a person who grew up with glasses, sometimes your eyes just need a break. So, you know, off go the glasses.
Absolutely.
And you can relax and then you forget where they are, et cetera, et cetera. But no, I think that has been interesting. And that meant that into school, there had to be specific accommodations for your eyesight, sitting at the front of the class, or...
So yes and no. And it's an interesting discussion, actually, because as I'm now an adult, volunteering also in the French Albinism Association in my free time, I get to meet many parents of young children with albinism. So I know what the situation is today. That is, I know what is offered to children with visual impairment in school today in France. And I see how parents, and that's completely normal, are always trying to get the most for their children to thrive and to be comfortable at school. So they keep asking what benefits, what services can be offered to their child. And reflecting on my childhood, I realized that my parents never asked for anything, pretty much. I think that was a very conscious decision, even though it was risky, because they were discovering albinism and all the challenges brought by albinism as we were growing up. They didn't have any previous experience of albinism, so it was like, okay, do they really need help? Yes, no, let's see how it goes. And you have to interview them to know exactly their side of the story. But my understanding is that their decision was to not make it more important than it really was, or than they thought it was, which means that the decision was to let us discover the world and find our own solutions to cope with albinism without asking all the time for outside help. So I had very minimum help at school, and it was very informal, which means that my parents would talk to the teacher, explain my difficulties, and the teacher would just take it into account without any formal process, anything written, any contract, anything. It was just a discussion with the teacher. And so I was sitting at the front row. As I said, I would have enlarged prints, and I would carry my magnifying glass, and that was it, nothing else. And that's the way it was until the end of high school. I never received any formal help, anything that was completely different to what my friends at school would get, normally sighted. I have no regret, but I'm sure that because of that decision of my parents, and because of me not asking for more, I mean, I have to take my responsibilities in that. Yeah. I probably went some unnecessary difficulties. It's very good to learn, to teach a child how to be independent and how to look for solutions without waiting for the solutions to be offered from people outside. But it's not always necessary to do that. And sometimes there's just no solution that you can find alone. You need help.
Yeah.
Because when you're visually impaired and there's nothing that can correct your vision 100%, you live in a world that is not designed for you.
Right.
That is not designed to respond to your needs. So it does make complete sense that you need external help from time to time. It's just a matter of finding where to set the cursor so that you become as independent as you can, because that's that's what we all need to be independent. But also to avoid bumping into unnecessary difficulties and just suffering from that. So again, I don't think that I kept from my childhood any traumas, any suffering. But I think that just sometimes it could have been slightly easier.
So do you remember the exact moment where you first became aware of albinism?
I would say it was around the beginning of middle school, when I turned 11 or 12.
So quite late.
Quite late. I mean, I knew the term, I knew the terminology, albinism, albino. I had heard that before. I even remember my grandmother, who was probably too focused on that term, who would say to strangers, coming to our place, before they wouldn't mention anything, before they wouldn't ask anything, oh, my grandchildren have albinism, by the way. Which was probably not very appropriate, but so I would hear that term once in a while. But it's one thing to hear the term, it's another thing to understand what it actually means. But we'll have to go back to what it actually means.
Yeah.
Because I gave a very medical definition.
Yeah.
There are other definitions, and it's worth exploring.
Yeah, and also in terms of the language too, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, why don't we dive into that? So, persons with albinism, people with albinism, is the correct,
the most recommended term today.
Most recommended. Yeah.
Yes. In English.
In English, correct. As opposed to albino.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, because albinism is rare, and because there's a very a visible component, all people with albinism, wherever they live around the world, at a certain point in life, and usually fairly quickly in life, experience some form of stigmatization. If you're different, you sooner or later you do experience stigmatization, and stigmatization is always accompanied, not to say fueled, by some terminology. And so even though the term albino per se is just a term, a word, a few letters, it's over time it's been used as a way to stigmatize people. So today is considered as a derogatory term, which means that people don't want to be called this way, full stop. The worst would be to be called albino, meaning that you're not a person, you're albino, that's it. That's the full definition of you, who you are. So that's why people really request this term, for this term not to be used. We eventually came to recommending the term person with albinism because it puts the person first. We are people, first and foremost. We have a specificity, which is albinism, but it doesn't define completely who we are. So that's why we recommend today using the term person with albinism. That's in English, though. In French, I would go for a slightly different approach. That is my personal approach. I think it's shared by other people. It is personnes albinos. So you hear there is the term albino in it, but still we're using the term person. But I know other languages, Portuguese, even sometimes in Spanish, not always. You'd have to ask my colleagues. Where saying albino is okay. So it depends on the context. Even in French, French is not used only in France. It's used in many other countries, and in our community, it's actually not France that is most represented, but particularly Francophone Sub-Saharan Africa. People might request to be called a different way than people do in France. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of being open-minded and asking the people how they want to be called and respecting their requests. It's important. It's important to make people feel comfortable and to be for them to be self-confident and to avoid any form of stigmatization that you could not even sometimes realize that it's happening. So that's about the terminology. I mentioned the fact earlier that the first definition that I gave to albinism was a very medical definition. There are other approaches to this question of what is albinism. What I like to mention all the time is where it comes from, when the term was first used. So as far as I know, the term albinism, albino, was first used, I think, in the 16th or 17th century, when some Portuguese, you would call them explorers or colons, went to Eastern Africa and came across some locals that were white.
Yeah.
So for them, it was easily identified, a white person in a black population, and they went for the term albinism because in Latin albus means white. So it was very simple, based on the color. There was no thing related to the vision at that time. It's only later on in the, if you look in the literature, it's I think in the 19th century that for the first time the visual component of albinism was described. And so from being just a skin and hair condition, color related, albinism became something more complex, including that visual component. Interestingly, at the turn of the century, so at the beginning of the 1900s, you find in the literature also the description of an ocular-only form of albinism. So there's no longer a skin and hair component. It's no longer visible at first glance, but you find the exact same visual impairment, the exact same visual components that are shared across all types of albinism, to the best of my knowledge. So it's becoming a much more complex condition to define, and it kept becoming more and more complex as science made progress in the 20th century. So today, the medical definition of albinism is extremely wide. It's what scientists like to say it's a phenotypic continuum, which means that the phenotype is the expression of the condition. And that means that the expression of the condition goes from one end to another, with people that are very light complected to people that have a pigmentation that is very similar to the parents, from people who are extremely visually impaired to people with a visual impairment that is quite mild. But there's no limit to that. So what is that definition?
So you're describing a spectrum. Is that
it's a spectrum?
Yeah.
From a medical standpoint.
Right.
Then, if we just ask people with albinism what their definition is, you might get something else. And it depends on who you ask that question to, meaning where that person is from. It's very interesting for me as a person with albinism from Europe to go to sub-Saharan Africa and ask my colleagues, leaders of albinism organizations in those countries, what their definition of albinism is. Their first definition is, it might vary from one leader to another, but often I would hear it's being white among black people. And there's no reason to argue. That's their definition, and that's probably, this definition is probably due to the fact that this is what has most impact in their life, to be very different in appearance to their in their community.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, you don't get the same definition in Europe, and you might get other definitions elsewhere. If you go to the north of Europe, go to Scandinavia, and I've been there before. I remember going to Denmark and being stopped at the border by the border officer speaking Danish to me because I looked just like the local population. So it's always a matter of context and surrounding population.
Yeah, it's interesting. Myself, white. My wife is Asian, and so it's a lot more jarring when she's traveling with my wife alone. And border guards, have to double check to understand the relationship. So I understand the context. Just going back to skin protection as a young boy growing up, sunscreen.
Yes.
And how essential it is. What was that like from a personal experience, both as your parents were learning about it, but also, the application? You grew up in France, which has wonderful, nice sunny days. Children play outside in the courtyard. That's encouraged. Do you have any personal memories of what it was like with that, having to get used to the discipline of the application, etc.?
It wasn't fun. It's never fun to put sunscreen on. It's never fun to worry about sun protection. So it wasn't fun when I was a kid. It's not fun today either. I was fortunate enough to be born at a time when sunscreen already existed. My mother doesn't have albinism, as I mentioned before, but she has red hair.
Okay.
And she grew up obviously before me at a time when there wasn't any really effective sunscreen, and I think she burned her entire childhood when she was on vacation, particularly. So no, I mean I don't have good memories of sun protection during my childhood. I remember getting burnt. I remember getting into arguments with my parents about photo protection. I remember me just deciding to avoid sun exposure, even though I certainly wanted to go out and play. But if I had to choose between going out and putting some sunscreen on, reapplying every 2 hours, and staying home, I would decide to stay home, which wasn't an ideal choice, but that was my choice. So no, I don't have particularly good memories, and I should also add to that the fact that I didn't know what to expect in the long run, because when you have albinism, you're being told that you are at higher risk of developing skin cancer. But what does that mean? Does that mean that no matter what, I will develop skin cancer? Does it mean that I have a 50% risk of developing skin cancer? And if so, when? I did not know. And the truth is that today we're still lacking a lot of knowledge on that particular issue. I grew up at a time there was no association of persons with albinism in France. So we were very isolated. Our experience of albinism was our family experience. We didn't have other people to exchange with and to learn from. The first time we got in contact with an association was in 1998. I was already 15 years old. So we couldn't learn from others. We had to figure out everything on our own. Today, with my experience of exchanging with many people with albinism in France and in Europe, I understand that the risk is very low. Taking into account that we are educated and that we have access to photo protection, we have access to dermatologists, skin cancer screenings. So if we just follow the recommendations, we're fine, we're safe. Which doesn't mean that there's no burden. Photo protection per se is a burden, and that's why people don't like to apply photo protection. I mean, I'm not just talking about people with albinism. I'm talking about the general population. many people would say, no, I don't put sunscreen on because, you know, on me it's sticky, it's oily, I don't like the way it looks. And people don't realize that it's the same for everybody. So it's a burden to put sunscreen on, but that looming threat that I grew up with, the looming threat of developing skin cancer, has pretty much disappeared today. I know that I'm safe. I know that I need to be careful, but it's not a reality for me in France and for people my age living in France. Those who grew up at a time there was no sunscreen and no education might still develop skin cancer in their senior years, but that's a limited number of people. Of course, in other regions of the world, it's a completely different
story.
Exactly. Yeah.